I'm introducing Chris Wilmers, and the reason I'm introducing him is because my mom would kill me if I didn't. So, about a year after I started working here, she was at dinner back in New York with some friends of ours, really close family friends, and she calls me late one night and she said, I just met this great couple, and their son is doing this work with these big cats, and oh my gosh! And I went, you mean Chris Wilmers? She said, oh, yeah, I think his parents are named Wilmers. I don't know, but wow, these big cats. And I said, Mom, I help him raise money to help these cats. So I'm seeing her this weekend, and if I said I didn't introduce him, she'd be really upset. So anyway, Chris Wilmers, he is an associate professor in environmental studies at UCSC in the Division of Social Sciences. He founded the Santa Cruz Puma Project in 2008. Prior to that, he got his doctorate at Berkeley. His dissertation was on introduction of wolves to the Yellowstone National Park impacted scavengers and the ecosystem. It's just amazing what great work our researchers do at UCSC, and especially social sciences, and I believe Chris Wilmers is one of those amazing people. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ashley, for that nice introduction, and thank you, Event Santa Cruz and Department of Social Sciences for putting this all together, and thank you all for coming and listening to us. It's a real pleasure to get to tell you a little bit about ourselves and the work we do. I'm a bit of a migrant myself. I'm not from Santa Cruz. I was actually born in New York City, and very quickly took a detour to Belgium, where I lived until I was about 5 years old. So when I was 5, I spoke way better French than I spoke English. But don't corner me now and try to speak French to me, because I've lost a little bit of that ability. So then I spent my childhood in New York City, playing basketball in the streets and listening to rap music and being a city kid. But I always had this sort of great love for the outdoors. And when I got to college and graduated from college, I spent much of my late teenage years and early 20s kind of roaming around the Intermountain West, places like Wyoming, the Wind River Range, Yellowstone, California, going on backpacking trips, leading backpacking trips. And so I sort of developed this sort of dual love for cities and all the culture and diversity they have to offer, and also real wild places and the sort of communing with nature that can happen there, and the way it affects your soul. And those are the two things that really come together and sort of influence my work. I got to Santa Cruz because, well, I did my PhD work at Berkeley, and when I finished my PhD work, I was thinking, well, gee, I would love to be a professor and continue to do this kind of work, and but there's only a few places that have that sort of combination of urban and natural areas, and so UC Santa Cruz was really at the top of my list as one of those places. Not only did it have that combination of the urban and the natural, but it also was a sort of top program in environmental science, conservation biology. And lo and behold, a job offering came up, and I applied for the job, and I got an interview, and I was really excited about this. And when I told my wife I got an interview there, she said, "Oh, you better grow a beard." And I had been to a few other interviews, and the feedback I had gotten was that I was a little bit green. And my wife said, this was 10 years ago or whatever. My wife said, "Oh, it's not that you're green, you just look like you're 12." So I grew my beard, and I got the job. And then once I got the job, I cut off the beard, and I came back to Santa Cruz to look around a little bit more in depth. And I was trying to find the bookstore, and so I asked a an undergrad. I think she must have been a freshman or a sophomore. I said, hey, do you know where the bookstore is? I'm trying to find it. She's like, oh, I'm going there. I'll bring you. Are you a prospective student? And so what I realized is that, Santa Cruz has all these great qualities about it that sort of fit in well with my life, and if I came here, it was gonna keep me young forever. So today I'd like to tell you 3 stories about my research that I hope will sort of inform the way you guys look at our local wildlife. The first story I want to tell you about is, my research is, just to back up a little bit, is on wildlife. I'm a wildlife ecologist. I study animals, from the size of little mice all the way up to big things like mountain lions. And I'm particularly interested in global change and how that influences wildlife populations. So global change, it can be things like habitat fragmentation that occurs from development. It can be things like climate change that happen because of excess CO2 in the air. It can be things like overhunting, when we hunt animals, but we hunt them too much and we cause their populations to decline and go extinct. And so the first story I want to tell you about is Lyme disease. Lyme disease, as you know, is a very debilitating disease that is an increasing problem, particularly in the Northeast, but a little bit here too in California. And Lyme disease has always been in North America. It's a native disease to North America. But it didn't become a problem until the late 1970s, early 1980s. And the question is why? And what we figured out in our lab is that it had a lot to do with changing wildlife communities. So gray wolves used to exist throughout North America, including on Manhattan Island. But we did a pretty good job of eliminating them from most of the landscape. And what happened was, when we got rid of wolves in the Northeast, coyotes actually moved their range to the east and invaded those northeastern areas. And what our research has shown, and this is work that I did with my graduate student, Tal Levy, is that when you have wolves, they keep coyotes at bay, and foxes end up doing really well. When you get rid of wolves, coyotes do enormously well, and foxes decline dramatically. And the key players in Lyme disease are deer, which wolves love to eat, and mice, which foxes love to eat. Coyotes will eat a little bit of deer and a little bit of mice, but they're more of a squirrel and rabbit predator. And so what has happened in the Northeast, and our research showed this, we looked at data on the number of deer, the number of coyotes, the number of foxes, in a number of different states, and within states we looked at it on a county level, is that when coyotes show up in a state or they show up in a county, fox populations plummet and Lyme disease incidence starts to skyrocket. And so if we look at the Bay Area and the Santa Cruz area, a question that is puzzling biologists is, well, why isn't Lyme disease taking off here like it is on the East Coast? And one reason that our research is just starting to hint at, it's certainly not definitive, is that we still have one of our large predators here, and that's the mountain lion. And what we see is that where we have mountain lions, where mountain lions are sort of thick, coyotes are held at bay, and foxes tend to do a little bit better. And so it could be that one of the reasons that we have lower incidence of Lyme disease here in California is because we still have one of our top predators. The second story I want to tell you about is sea otters and climate change. When I got to UCSC, I was thinking a lot about climate change, and I was thinking a lot about predators because of work I had been doing on gray wolves in Yellowstone. And there's this theory, this idea in ecology, which has achieved real prominence, and it's this idea of what's called a trophic cascade. And the idea is that when you have a predator, it suppresses the herbivore and it allows plants to flourish. And one of the main guys who figured this out was a fellow named Jim Estes, who's been a longtime researcher here in Santa Cruz, first with USGS and now with UC Santa Cruz. And he did some pioneering work in offshore communities with sea otters. And he basically showed that when you have sea otters in the ecosystem, they suppress sea urchins, and that allows kelp forests to flourish. You remove the sea otters, the sea urchins increase in number, they start crawling all over the rocks, and they eat down all the kelp, and you're left with an underwater desert. And he showed this. It's dramatic. It occurs. He's shown this to occur everywhere from Vancouver Island all the way out to the tips of the Aleutian Islands. And it's really dramatic. If sea otters disappear, underwater desert. If they get put back in the system, underwater forest. And I thought, well, wow, how much carbon are these kelp sucking up when you have sea otters? And we put together some numbers, and we figured out that the impact on carbon and carbon sequestration from the atmosphere of having sea otters was really dramatic. It turns out that when you have sea otters in the ecosystem, they sequester, and if you imagine the world as just sea otters, or you imagine the atmosphere above where sea otters live, sea otters end up sequestering about 11% of the carbon in that atmosphere. Another way to think about it is that it's about 20 to 40% of the increase in atmospheric carbon since pre-industrial times. And you can put a price on the amount of how much that carbon is worth because there is, at least the time we did the paper, there was a carbon market in Europe. And we figured out that that carbon was worth about $200 million. The last story I want to tell you is about mountain lions here in Santa Cruz and what they're telling us about land conservation. What we did is we've collared a bunch of these mountain lions, and we've looked at how their behavior changes in relationship to human development. And you know, I get emails all the time. They tell me, oh, I saw a mountain lion on my driveway this morning, and here's a picture of a mountain lion going through my backyard. And so we know they're out there, and they're moving around the landscape pretty liberally. And it looks like they don't really care too much about going through people's driveways and things like that. But it turns out that they do care a lot. It just depends on what they're doing. If mountain lions are looking for food and moving around on the landscape, yeah, they'll go through people's backyards, and they'll go into, you know, rural areas like Bonnie Doon, no problem. They won't come so much into the center of Santa Cruz, but they will explore these different communities. But when they're trying to hook up with mates and reproduce and then raise their cubs, they like to be much more remote. And so they're telling us where those remote areas are and how remote they need to be, which helps us think about land conservation and what kinds of size of parcels we need to preserve to help wildlife. The other thing they're telling us is where they cross roads, in particular Highway 17. Many of you might have noticed they just increased the median barriers on Highway 17 to about this tall. And while that's great for human safety, it makes it a real death trap for animals because they can't see when they're crossing the highway, they can't see the cars coming, and so they jump, and often they jump right into a moving vehicle. So it's actually a human safety issue too. And what mountain lions are showing us, they're showing us where they're crossing Highway 17. And so now we're working with Caltrans and a number of NGOs in the area to try to replumb the highway, particularly in those areas that are mountain lion and other wildlife crossings. We're trying to figure out ways to put tunnels underneath the highway and directional fencing that would make the animals go towards those tunnels and underneath. So I think my time is up, but I hope those 3 stories influence the way you think about our local wildlife. Thanks.